Afternoon and welcome everyone to this Global Maritime Technology webinar. My name is Petra Ahari and I'm the Project Officer of the European Union and IMO's Global MTCC Network Project, the GMN. The main purpose of this webinar is to identify and discuss the barriers and opportunities for maritime energy efficiency technologies in the Caribbean region. But before we start, there is some housekeeping information to share. The webinar is being recorded and the recording will be shared after the webinar on the GMN website. The webinar will run for approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes. Please use the Q&A window to ask questions during the webinar, and all questions will be answered after the presentation during the Q&A session. The meeting is broken down into 3 parts. First, we will have one introductory presentation on the GMN project and a short overview of IMO GAG initiatives. This will be followed by presentation from MTCC Caribbean on barriers and opportunities for low and zero carbon shipping. And the webinar will end with a panel discussion. The meeting is scheduled to conclude at approximately 11:30 local time. So I'm happy to introduce the presenters and panel members. They are Anton Rhodes, GMN Project Manager, Jos Matekel, Chief Department of Partnerships and Projects at IMO, Mr. Ashley Taylor, President at Point Lisas Industrial Development Corporation, Captain Rol Badalu, co-leader at Caribbean Marine Environment Protection Association, Captain Sukhjit Singh, MTCC Caribbean Deputy Director and Technical Head, Mr. Stefan Nanan, MTCC Caribbean Greenhouse Gas Advisor, and Mrs. Suzette Balkaran, MTCC Caribbean Energy Efficiency Advisor. Now, before we begin, it should also be noted that the opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and may not necessarily represent the views of IMO or European Union. Now, with that, I would like to invite Dr. Jos Matekel, Chief of the IMO Department of Partnerships and Projects, to provide welcome remarks to commence the webinar. Over to you, Jos.
Thank you, Petra. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay,
fantastic. Good morning, everybody. I'm bringing the greetings of the IMO Secretary General to all of you. And I was in the middle of the IMO Council that's ongoing right now. And I just took a short break to greet you because it's an extremely important meeting. So if I were to leave after this, and I may join back later on, but let me begin by thanking all of you to be here, which shows the interest of all of you on this particular issue that we are dealing with, the climate change. It is a global challenge. It's a challenge for the industry, shipping industry, maritime sector. It's a challenge for IMO too, and it's especially a unique challenge for the SIDS and the LDCs, and especially the SIDS and most of the Caribbean countries probably have the similar challenges on this. On this context, I would like to update you what has been happening in IMO. As you all know that we had adopted the energy efficiency regulations quite some time back, and subsequently a technology cooperation a resolution was adopted. Then we had the IMO initial GHG strategy, a very ambitious strategy that was adopted, that expect 50% of the emission cuts by 2050 and phasing out as early as possible in the century. Further to that, we had a IMO mandatory data collection system that was adopted. Then we had another resolution that encouraged the ports to work with the ships to reduce emissions. So that's another development. And very recently, as of the last 2 weeks' time, you may have heard that IMO also adopted the amendments, the MAP 1X6, by adopting the short-term measures on reducing GHG emissions. And these included measures such as the energy efficiency existing ship index. Then we had the carbon intensity indicator, such as a kind of energy rating system for the ships. And also, it considered the impact of these measures on developing countries, and especially CIS and LDCs. There was a comprehensive impact assessment, and that also was taken into consideration while adopting these measures. And also, again, importantly, IMO adopted a work plan for the mid and the long-term measures. So as we can see and look back, there has been a steady progress being made by the policymakers and especially the IMO on this matter. But as we all know, the road to decarbonization is very long, and it has to be a common road as well. So we cannot go too far if we are not taking everybody along with us. And that is extremely important in the context we are talking here on the challenges of the CITs and the LDCs and the capacity to take this long journey. And hence, projects such as the MTCC, the GMN network, comes into play an important role in implementing the IMO GHG strategy. We should be proud that IMO, because of the good work of the MTCC network, IMO saw the merits of MTCC and included that in the GHG strategy itself. And the last MEPC, we heard from so many countries on the benefits of MTCCs, the value they see in the MTCC network, and subsequently, European Union expressing an interest to look into the possibility of a continuation of MTCCs. So they were all very good developments that happened in the very recent times, and I'm extremely happy that the MTCC network is organizing these webinars to share the information, what has been achieved, and what to look forward to. But most importantly, your participation, your engagement has made MTCC the successful MTCC as we know right now. So thank you for your engagement. And with that, let me thank organizers of this webinar, the PCO of IMO, the MTCC Caribbean, the colleagues there, and all the presenters who are here today with us, and all the participants to this meeting. Thank you very much for your interest, and wish you all the very best for a very fruitful next 1.5 hours. Thank you so much. Thank you. Over to you, Petra.
Thank you, Jose. Very appreciated. Now for our first presentation, Anton Rhodes, the GMN project manager, will give us a brief overview of the GMN project before briefly introducing the GHG initiatives that are currently being undertaken by the Department of Partnerships and Projects at IMO. Over to you, Anton.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me okay, Petra?
Yes, yes, we can.
Brilliant. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, as Petra said, I'm just going to give a kind of brief introduction to what is the GMN, also an introduction to some of the work that's been undertaken by the Caribbean. But before I get into that, what I'd like to do is cover some of those points that Joe's outlined during his introduction. So looking at this broader issue of shipping and GHG emissions. So the latest data shows that international shipping emits around 2.89% of global CO2 emissions. And whilst one could say that's relatively modest compared to other sectors, with shipping, there's a very strong potential for this figure to grow if appropriate action is not undertaken. With shipping, the potential growth comes with the fact that, as global trade levels grow, so will shipping emissions. So this is something that has to be factored in terms of future projections. To combat these shipping emissions, both real and potential, the IMO's initial GHG reduction strategy was adopted in 2018. And this sets out a vision to phase out GHG emissions as soon as possible in this century. And of course, on the back of this, the big question is how these targets will be achieved. So as follow up to the strategy, the IMO's Marine Environment Protection Committee, MEPC, is now focused on agreement of short, medium, and long-term measures. Next slide, please. Thanks. Some measures have already been agreed, and Joe's mentioned these during his opening remarks. What has been agreed is a strengthening of ship design and operational requirements. So that step has been taken. And the other types of measures which are still under consideration, these are still being discussed. The next MEPC meeting is in November. And other topics still on the table for discussion include things like vessel speed and low carbon or zero carbon fuels and technology. And you can see on the slide as well some of the other measures that could be introduced in the future. There are others. This isn't a conclusive list. But to summarize, big changes in the shipping sector are now underway, and they have been underway for a while. But there's also a kind of a realization that more action is required. And I think for a lot of stakeholders, there is an urgency now in terms of more action being undertaken by the shipping sector. So the kind of targets have been set in terms of what the shipping sector needs to do, the direction it needs to move. And there's a realization as well that this is going to need an unprecedented level of collaboration. The shipping sector is complex in its international nature. There will need to be a lot of collaboration for the type of energy efficiency improvements which are now being proposed or have just been agreed. And there are encouraging signs that since the GHG strategy was adopted, there are many partnership initiatives which are now underway. If we look at just the changes within IMO in the last couple of years, as an example, we've had a new department established, focused on partnerships and projects. And within this new department, there's a large and growing portfolio of GHG focused initiatives and projects. There's an awful lot of focus and resource in this area. And I think as part of this move towards more collaboration, there's also recognition that leaving nobody behind is of crucial importance for the successful implementation of the strategy. And what that means really is there needs to be a focus on the challenges being faced by small island developing states and least developed countries. So regions like the Caribbean must be supported if they are expected to contribute to the reduction of shipping emissions. And it's within this space of providing technical support, capacity building to developing regions that the GMN project is now playing a very important role. So what is the GMN project? A few of the kind of essential facts. It's an EU and IMO partnership project. It was launched back in 2016. Essentially, EU is financing the project and IMO is responsible for implementation. As already mentioned, GMN's focused on supporting least developed countries and SIDS. And to achieve this objective, Maritime Technology Cooperation Centers were established in 5 regions, Caribbean, of course, being one of the 5. A few words on the GMN concept, because it is quite different from the usual IMO approach to capacity building. Instead of activities and events being organized from IMO HQ, the GMN approach is that a much greater level of responsibility is handed over to the participating regions. For example, the MTCCs manage their own budgets, develop and implement their own work plans, and employ their own staff. So the idea here is that we help to institutionalize the capacity building at the local level. And another point about the GMN is that these MTCCs have always been intended to be self-sustaining and long-term in their perspective. The hope is that they are there providing support to the regions long into the future. And we talked about the kind of time frame of the IMO's GHG reduction strategy. The targets there are for 2050. And it's that kind of time frame that we're looking in terms of the future of the GMN and the support it can provide. So, having given this overview of the project, what I'd like to do now is shine a spotlight on MTCC Caribbean and to give a clearer picture on what they have achieved in region. So a few details on the Caribbean team. This consists of 2 full-time and 4 part-time staff. All of the team are based within dedicated offices at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, which of course is the host institution. The centre became operational at the beginning of 2017. So in addition to the capacity building activities, online training courses, regional level conferences, national level workshops, all of this, in addition, MTCC Caribbean has been responsible for implementing 2 pilot projects, and this has been a major focus for the MTCC over the past 4 years. These pilots focus on uptake of ship energy efficiency technologies and operations, and fuel consumption data collection and reporting. I think the easiest way to explain what they've done is to explain, just some of the achievements. The first achievement of the pilot projects was to create a baseline of existing technologies and best practices on board vessels trading in the Caribbean. Also, they created a baseline on fuel consumption and estimated GHG emissions for ships trading in the region. Through their work, they've also identified the main energy consumers and the most effective abatement measures. And finally, through their actions, they've established a fuel consumption data reporting system to aid regional administrations. So as you can see, they've been quite busy. To give you an idea of the scale of these pilot projects, the team collected data from almost 60% of passing ships in the Caribbean. That's over 1,000 separate vessels contributing some 23,000 data sets. I think taken in isolation, any one of these achievements would be considerable. Taken collectively, they represent, I think, a major step to being able to reduce shipping emissions in the Caribbean. And just a bit more in terms of this impact of the MTCC Caribbean. So this work has established a basis for setting targets and ensuring accountability to relevant stakeholders. The work of the centre also allows informed decision-making on technology investments and appropriate measures. It increases awareness of the potential, not just for GHG reduction, but also, very importantly, cost reduction. And it also allows policymakers to develop a consistent regional approach to reducing shipping emissions. Someone very clever said, knowledge is power. Well, MTCC are providing that knowledge so that all the appropriate steps to reduce emissions can be undertaken in the region. They're essentially building a very strong foundation with the data they've collected, the knowledge that they're developing that can support the Caribbean in the future. And, the final point to emphasize, all of this was achieved because the MTCC was able to build a very extensive maritime network across the region, very close engagement with the regional stakeholders, both in terms of private and public sector. You know, that I think has very much been the key to their success. So, having given that introduction, I'd like to now hand back to Petra. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you for presenting the GMN project and for introducing some of the MTCC Caribbean achievements. Now I'd like to give the floor to our MTCC Caribbean colleagues who are going to take us through the barriers and opportunities for low and zero carbon shipping in the Caribbean region. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Petra. I will share the screen. Let me know if you can see the screen.
Okay, yes. Okay. All right, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Everyone hearing me loud and clear, right?
Yes.
So what Suzette and I will be doing this morning is we will be given, before we go into the challenges and the barriers that Captain Singh will deal with, we'll be given an overview of the emission reduction measures on the commercial vessels operating in the region. And this will have been the measures from data that we collected over the period of the 2 pilot projects I mentioned, that Anton just mentioned. So MTCC capacity building initiatives involve 2 pilot projects. And as mentioned before, the objective of pilot project 1 was to map the existing energy efficiency technologies and operational practices that are used on board the vessels trading in the Caribbean region. The objective of pilot project 2 was to establish the fuel consumption data collection system from these vessels also. So in order to achieve these objectives, MTCC Caribbean, it was required that we develop a data collection mechanism. And this data collection mechanism involved the development of a single data collection form that was implemented to collect the data from the ships. So the data analysis on the data involved the data collection, and we requested a number of different particulars, both dynamic data and static data from the vessel. So some of the ship particulars were required. We needed to determine the types of ships, the IMO numbers, the tonnage, the machinery on board to identify the main fuel consumers, and any emission control and abatement methods that were employed. We also requested the types of fuels used on board, and the dynamic data involved voyage information, the ports of arrival and departure during the voyage, and the fuel consumption. And we also requested sea conditions during the voyage. The outcomes from this, when the data was analyzed, we established a number of baselines. In addition to establishing the data collection mechanism, we also were able to establish the baseline on the energy efficiency and abatement methods on the ships used, the types of fuel used, and also a benchmark of the energy efficiency operational indicator of the vessels plying in the region.
So the MTCC Caribbean's data collection process would have included a single form. It facilitated the data collection for both of our pilot projects. The ships that were over 400 gross tonnage and above were required to submit their data. Any vessels that were under this, we also encouraged them to partake in our pilot projects. And the forms, of course, would have been capturing the details that we needed on the equipment and machinery, on the emissions abatements, any efficiency technologies on board. And our stakeholders involved, the shipping agents, the ports and terminals, shipping operators and owners, maritime administrators, and pilots, associations, and of course seafarers on board the vessels to fill out the form. The data collection system, of course, involved different streams where we would have collected our data. We had the maritime administrations and also our energy efficiency focal points that were established in our 16 countries. And we also had the use of single electronic windows, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago. This online portal allowed us to have access to uploading our forms as well as downloading the forms through the use of the shipping agents. We also had direct reporting, and through direct reporting, we would have had where we had vessels sending their data directly to MTCC Caribbean. In some cases, they actually would have had the data being sent to their offices, being collated and sent to MTCC Caribbean. And lastly, we had the access to IHS database, where we would have also been able to get some information. So following through, you can see our data collection streams to the left where I discussed, and also with the MTCC Caribbean's online voluntary reporting system. This was a system, or OVRS, that was designed specifically for the reporting needs of the Caribbean region. And this has a double feature where it is that we can actually share the data that we collated. Also, we can generate reports, we can show any kind of specific information. And also there's a country data section where it is that we can find information pertaining to the 16 territories.
So the data sets collected, right? This was from approximately 1,800 port calls and 518 vessels reporting. Now, anytime within the Caribbean region, there's approximately 4,200 vessels. Around 2,800 of these vessels are pleasure crafts, and 1,400 vessels are commercial vessels, including fishing vessels. Right, 833 of these vessels are about greater than 400 gross tonnage, right, and approximately 567 are greater than 5,000 gross tonnage above. Those are over 500 gross tonnage were identified as the main contributors and were targeted for the purpose of data collection. Although we still can encourage all vessels, regardless of the tonnage, to report, to fill out the forms and report. So from these vessels, approximately 31% of the port calls were from tankers, 30% from container ships, 5% bulk carriers, 24% cruise ships, and general cargo and refrigerated cargo, 5%. 3% from car carriers, and others, approximately 2%. Others include offshore supply vessels and some commercial fishing vessels and some of the larger pleasure crafts. So the percentage of the vessel from the vessel type, approximately the largest bulk, nearly 50% were tankers, 12% container ships, 13% bulk carriers, and 10% cruise ships. The other 10% general and refrigerated cargoes, 4% carriers, car carriers, and 2% others. The total gross tonnage, if we look at from the data collected, approximately 91% of these vessels were over 5,000 gross tonnage and above, and 56% were between 5,000 to 50,000 gross tonnage. The largest group was 5,000 to 10,000 gross tonnage. And the age of these vessels, the average age was 11 to 15 years. Now, it's worthy to note also that 77% of the vessels are newer than 16 years, indicating that these vessels are of an age where it is of benefit to implement new technologies on board, as they have quite a considerable lifetime still remaining. The EECMs, the emissions control and energy efficiency measures on board, we noticed that the majority of the vessels have what we call mature technologies, or they employ mature technologies. Approximately 72% of them have hull coatings. 6% of them utilize air cavity lubrication. 38% of them dual fuel engines. 50% have waste heat recovery systems on board. 17% of them high scavenge pressure and compression ratio measures. Also, when we look at the energy efficiency measures on board, 51% use low energy lighting systems. Approximately 60% utilize some type of system for vessel trim and draft optimization. 44% voyage and route optimization. However, for some of the newer technologies, only 1% of these vessels had any kind of renewable energy systems on board, and that was in the effect of solar panels. When we look at the fuels used on board, the fuel used on board, the majority of vessels, the major fuel at that time was still heavy fuel oil. 31% of them had HFO being used as the main fuel, and marine gas oil or marine diesel oil, the distillate fuels, are some of the secondary fuels. 14% was HFO only, right? So from the data, what we realized was the majority of the vessels in the region, HFO was still the primary fuel being used on board in combination with some of the distillates.
From the data collected, we were able to calculate the energy efficiency operational indicator for the data sets. We employed both methodologies, bottom-up method 1 and method 2. For method 1, we had calculations being based on the activity reporting from the fuel consumption data from the individual ships under various voyage conditions. And this was data that we were actually collecting via our MTCC Caribbean's data collection form. That included 1,203 data sets. We were able to get the average EOI for the different types of vessels, the different categories, and we were able to also establish the GHG emissions for those different types of categories. Similarly, with method 2, this data was accessed using IHS Market. We used that database. We were able to actually calculate over 20,000 data sets from the IHS Market database. And similarly, that represented over 1,702 vessels, and we were able to calculate the average EOI for the different categories of the vessels and the subsequent emissions.
So summing up, this was some of the first work in the region of this type, where we actually have so many stakeholders involved in reporting information and exchanging data from the vessels. As Suzette mentioned, approximately 2,200 data sets were analyzed, and this includes the data sets that we collected directly from the ships and also those that we were able to access through IHS Market. So now we have an official baseline of these energy efficiency measures that are being used on board. We were able to establish a baseline of the greenhouse gas emissions from the vessels at the reporting vessels during that period, and the energy efficiency operational indicator, the baseline of the EOI for the vessels operating within the region. We should also note here too that a good percentage of our vessels that were reporting were also the cruise lines that were falling within the Caribbean region. We also have the first database of fuel inventory, the types of fuel being consumed, the amounts of fuel being consumed. And this data now and this information could help the region, the decision makers within the regions, to make some more informed decisions on the way forward and how the Caribbean now could play its role in decarbonizing the maritime sector. Okay. I'll now pass you over to Captain Singh.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. You can hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I will take you forward from here. So along with our pilot projects and capacity building exercises within the region, MTCC Caribbean also undertook a technology needs assessment, especially aimed at maritime technology uptake. And as you can see, it was important because within the initial IMO GHG strategy, it was recognized that technological innovations as the facilitators of achieving emission reduction ambitions. So it was important to quantify the maximum potential, which has been done in various studies for GHG reduction using the new technology and efficiency measures. But it is also acknowledged that it is complex due to various organizational or technical or economic or political barriers when it comes to implementation of technology. So because especially when the application of these measures is dependent on distinct ship types and age. And this is where, as I was saying, that in addition to our pilot projects, which captured the baseline on use of ship energy efficiency technologies within the Caribbean region, there was a clear, relationship based on the pilot projects, which was established between the level of technology on board and the related reduction in emissions, which was evident from that data collected from 2017 to 2019. That data within what Stefan and Suzette highlighted also highlighted that the existing technologies on the majority of vessels are mature. So it was important to achieve successful outcomes. It is vital to understand how the new technology uptake can be promoted, and that cannot be done without how the various stakeholders perceive their role. And that is what was the basis of performing the technology needs assessment. So therefore it was essential to take into account the viewpoint of each stakeholder within the complex maritime sector, especially when it comes to the uptake of technology, to understand their perspective towards this uptake. So this is why MTCC Caribbean conducted this technology needs assessment to capture the viewpoint of stakeholders within our region. And in this regard, this TNA was the first of its kind again in the Caribbean region, and the core objectives was to determine what are the available technologies to the participating stakeholders, and what is the existing gap, which can be defined as the difference between the existing and available technologies within the region. So what is existing within the region and what is available globally or within the region to the stakeholders. And then it was also important to see what are the technology needs of stakeholders, what are the factors they consider when they make technology uptake decisions, right? And then certainly that would take us to the barriers to implementing the technology needs, and finally a view on what would be the actions required to help overcome these barriers. So as I was saying, the stakeholder engagement was key for valid results. And you can see here on the slide the geographic and operational span of these stakeholders. So you can see from the operational perspective, it included vessel owners, operators, ports in the region, maritime administrations, technology providers, right? And the ship operators and owners from outside the region were also involved, especially for those whose ships were operating within the region. So when we checked on the awareness of the technologies with the various stakeholders, so clearly owners and operators were the most aware group of energy efficient technologies. They scored about 3.78 out of 5. So which was followed by maritime administrations, who are basically responsible for regulation and enforcement surrounding the use of these technologies, I would say. And it may have also reflected the work which GMN project and MTCC Caribbean has done in the region to raise the awareness of the technologies within the administration. The providers of the technology, which designed the technology, they were the third most aware category when examined on the options outside of their own solutions. They were very much aware of what they're providing, but when it comes to a synergetic view or or how much aware they are of other technologies out of their own solutions. So they were third most aware. And then I mean, they were average awareness was 2.25 out of 5, which is the ports basically. So what happens, as you can see, for the ports, they were the least aware, making them almost 60% less aware than the owners and operators. So ports were displayed the largest awareness gap among stakeholders. So this is an important implication from a perspective of a region, I would say, where it means we need to now also target the capacity and technical investment on the shore side, because in absence of that, we cannot support energy efficient ships, or for that matter, the newer ships using greener technology on high seas. To support the ships, we need those investments into the ports. Looking at the factors as highlighted during the methodology, what we looked into while these stakeholders make a decision to identify the need for technology. So you can see the top factors given the most priority while taking technology uptake decision by stakeholders were the availability of the financial support, upcoming regulations, because they play a key role, that because especially given the lifespan of a vessel, that if a trading life of a vessel is to be extended, what would be the new requirements, amendments, regulatory driver, right, and the return of investment. Now you can see within the top 3, 2 are related directly to economic behavior or the financial or economic decision, and this again highlights that economics of the business along with regulatory environment are 2 major drivers towards the uptake of sustainable technology. Now, on the other side, when a technology was identified, right? So while selecting a suitable technology, for example, for a specific use, you will again see the 2 topmost factors is profitability and regulatory compliance. So these are the 2 factors again which lead the response to that question. And again, it was they were found at the forefront, which again emphasizes the role of both the regulations, and the finance which is required, or to build a business case of the uptake of the technology. Now, each stakeholder, as you can see, it was important not only to have a generic view at what we saw on the previous slide, to have more meaningful interventions. It was also required that we understand the view of each stakeholder with respect to the barriers, because each one of them have a different role within the sector, and they have a different perspective and what they want to achieve from this, right? So and how they want to achieve is also different. So this is important to understand their individual viewpoint. So again, I mean, this was further expanded, but however, again, as we say, is to combine the results. As we see, the findings and analysis were very similar to the previous themes, as you can see, the lack of finance, regulatory requirements, and high initial investment cost came up as significant barriers to the technology uptake, right? And majority of other barriers, which were considered as medium by many stakeholders, were put in that category. But the implication again offered from the analysis, it highlights that it may be easier to target these moderate, the barriers, because they may offer very quickly the low-hanging fruits. Because we know the regulatory requirements and the high initial investment. These are barriers, but they are the major barriers. But the other barriers may be easier to break, and they may offer low-hanging fruits in promoting technology uptake. And in a simple example can be some incentives for them when they're arriving in port, operating in region, things like that. Now, any technology needs assessment, in our opinion, as MTCC Caribbean, we thought is not complete, because we do have results, but what we do with those results. So it was important to have some sort of an action plan also come out of this needs assessment. So this is where we developed a technology action plan basically is a plan for the uptake and diffusion of technologies based on the identified priorities that will contribute to the maritime climate change mitigation and adaptation, right? So this tab was created by MTCC Caribbean, which is made of numerous specific actions, which some of them may not be very technology specific, but it covers a portfolio of technologies as we assessed under the MTCC Caribbean's TNA. Now, this plan outlines pathways for implementation of technology transfer based on the feedback which was received along with the data which was collected within the exercise of TNA, right? So you will see there are various points, right, from availability of sharing data, providing, creating more awareness among stakeholders, assessing finance, up-to-date maritime legislation. So a lot of these are linked to the pathways how we can overcome the barriers, right? And so in summary, the tab basically outlined the required action which is required, what are the important needs, and what is required action for implementing the technology transfer. It also identified the actions needed to implement the identified actions. So there need to be some foundation on which these actions can be taken. And certainly the stakeholder engagement is still a very important aspect for all these activities. The summary, as I said, you can see it in the slide here, but the regulations and finance were still the key aspect how we access them, and this was taking us forward, because technology appropriateness or access to trials on ships, these were some operational aspects which could be easily overcome. But when it comes to finance and regulations, those are two main key aspects, and also the two main barriers which was highlighted, which needed an enabling environment, right? And this is where the enabling environment which requires a policy push, so a policy reform to facilitate changes which can be in implementation by relevant stakeholders. So such interventions will need to be in line with the incentives that would drive the business decisions. The development of the maritime sector is on the legislative agenda of many Caribbean countries, but the enabling environment should address the gaps between the available technologies and the technologies in use. It should see that how we can enable or facilitate the cooperation among various stakeholders in the region, including maritime administration, right? Because such cooperation should be directed towards the removal of barriers which we identified, and adoption of a framework which is efficient for facilitating the technology. So looking at a bigger picture, it will require investment into capacity building, institutions, infrastructure, port infrastructure, and certainly the socio-economic environment within the region when it comes to maritime sector. Now, while financial considerations and regulatory compliance are noted drivers for energy efficiency, but the inadequacy of enforcement of certain regulations, that also creates an environment where ship operators may not or do not perceive the need to comply. So that was also specifically highlighted by some stakeholders when these discussions were on. So it is important that government interventions are important, and they're likely to play a key role in facilitating the low carbon technology transfer by developing a suitable policy and bringing the maritime sector within the inclusiveness of the wider agenda of decarbonization. Now, the business case for uptake of energy efficiency, that can only be made when obviously operating costs are reduced, right, or capital costs reduced when compared to the existing operational conditions. And this is also when we are talking about the medium or moderate barriers to overcome the those various incentives, or some kind of incentive for people who are the first movers of the technology. How we can introduce that in the region is also important, right? So in summary, if I say the Caribbean region, as we have been hearing, is is mainly comprising primarily of small island developing states. One of them does qualify as LDC. So and we do face unique environmental, social, and economic challenges while we are pursuing SDGs, right? This is especially relevant when we are looking at the transport sector and specifically maritime, because we are not only at the forefront of the impacts of climate change. We also need to we rely heavily on the maritime transport. It is a lifeline for us as SIDS, right? So we have to start some action, because time is not, it's running out, especially for us. So, but when it comes to the majority of technology transfer, we also understand that it is facilitated on a case-by-case basis between, for example, say, ship owner or ship operator and the technology provider, right? So, although technology transfer is often a private interaction between two companies or two, businesses, but institutional barriers and policies influence these transaction process, right? And as well as how efficiently this transfer can happen, that is influenced by the policy. And this is where, as I highlighted it, at a regional level, at government level, we need those push. So there's a considerable evidence that substantial energy efficiency investments are not done, even when they are lower in cost, especially the marginal energy supply. They are not done. Why? Because there are other incentives, or there are policies which do not support or do not support uptake of these technologies, and subsidy on traditional fuels is one aspect of that. So it's not only the barriers which we highlighted here. There also exist market barriers which will need a policy intervention to create an enabling environment, which I've been talking about. So the enabling environment for technology transfer in maritime sector will involve a complex interface of institutional knowledge, capacity, the type of ships, especially the age of the ships, and then the maritime technology which is available within the region, or how we bring it to the region, either horizontal or vertical transfer of this technology, right? And the commercialization of those technologies within the region. It is also, I feel, imperative to state here that commercial acceptance within the maritime sector is, as we have been saying, that it has to make a business sense, and the compliance requirement is there, but the business sense is the key driver for the uptake of technology, right? So it has to be targeted to the receivers. They should be able to understand, adopt, obviously, and then most importantly, sustain the technology. And that sustaining the technology will not come in absence of where there is enough infrastructure on the shore side to support such technologies, right? Now, if we look at, I mean, just to understand that point, if we look at many ports in the region, and many regional ports are transshipment hubs which attract heavy traffic within the Caribbean. And also we support a lot of cruise traffic, as highlighted, right? So which comes into our ports. But however, due to lack of supporting infrastructure to connect these vessels to alternative sources of energy, the air emissions released during their port stays are significant. And all our port cities are in very close proximity of our urban population. I mean, the 70% of vessel emissions occur within 400 kilometers of the coast for our Caribbean region. So this is a very right time now, because we have a regulatory environment which is pushing for such reductions. Time is running out for us, especially as SIDS. So there is a strong need than ever before to collaborate and find some innovative mechanism to invest in the modernization of our maritime fleets and port infrastructure. In summary, as I close, so this TNA involved identification and evaluation of technical means for achieving very specific ends. For our purpose, that was from climate change and emission reduction perspectives. But this TNA lends insight into the priorities of various stakeholders. The priorities vary among individuals and institutions and are affected by financial and regulatory measures, among many others. And these priorities influence the adoption of technologies practices and also the policy reforms that can be implemented on the ships to reduce GHG emissions. It also shows that how these stakeholders treat with adapting to impacts of climate change by enhancing or contributing to SDGs, right? So with the, if I say with the priorities may vary, right? But the key is to understand that we have to achieve both compliance among stakeholders, especially on the pathway to reducing air pollution from ships, right? We know there is a noticeable lag in the uptake of green technology within the region. Technical and financial resource constraints are the main barriers for efficient investments, right? Including monitoring and enforcement of such measures, right? And with a heavy emphasis on the lack of finance, it is important that we map the existing financial mechanisms with the opportunities presented in the region. It may need some innovative financial mechanisms, right? Because a lot of the projects or a lot of aid which is received by the region is based on the gross national income, but that may not be a proper indicator. So we need to invest in development of indicators which are more inclusive of vulnerability or other aspects of infrastructure which is required. And most importantly, there is a greater need to integrate the maritime agenda within the relevant SDGs for greater coordination with the wider program of action, right? And with that, I would say for more detail, you can always visit the 3 publications from MTCC Caribbean, which cover a wide array of the work which has been done in last 4 years, including the capacity building reflections and the GHG emissions pilot projects and the full detailed technology needs assessment, right? Thank you very much for your attention. I may have gone over the time, so I apologize for it.
Thank you very much, MTCC colleagues, for both presentations were excellent. You touched on some very important points there. And I think that was fantastic preparation for the panel discussion that we can now slowly move on to. As a reminder for this panel discussion, we will have Mr. Anton Rhodes, the GMN project manager, Mr. Ashley Taylor, president at Point Lisas Industrial Development Corporation, Captain Roel Badalu, co-leader at Caribbean Marine Environment Protection Association, Ms. Vivian Rambarat Parasram, director and head of MTCC Caribbean, Captain Sujit Singh, MTCC Caribbean Deputy Director and Technical Head, Mr. Stefan Nanan, MTCC Caribbean GHG Advisor, and Suzette Balkaran, MTCC Caribbean Energy Efficiency Advisor. And I would like to also remind participants that if you have any questions for the panel, please write these in the Q&A function. So I will kick off the Q&A session by with question for Anton Rhodes, the GMN project manager. In terms of capacity building and technical support, how is IMO supporting Caribbean to decarbonize shipping?
Thanks, Petra. Yeah, so there are various approaches to supporting Caribbean. I think one of the kind of central pillars of IMO support on capacity building, not just Caribbean, but globally, is the ITCP. That's the Integrated Technical Cooperation Program. And this is focused on helping countries to improve compliance with international rules and standards. IMO, of course, is a regulatory body, but one of the issues faced by countries that have to implement new regulation is that it requires a lot of resources and time, technical expertise, sometimes legal expertise. And it's in this area of actual implementation of the regulations that the ITCP plays a key role. So for the Caribbean, like other regions, there's a dedicated IMO regional representative. And the the activities undertaken by IMO usually focus on workshops. Sometimes there's drafting groups for specific legislation. Everything's geared up to assist countries to, to domesticate international law regulation and also to implement international regulation. So there's that side. And what we're seeing increasingly, and this goes back to my presentation about, IMO establishing a new department for partnerships and projects, that there's a growing emphasis on project work. And I know that for the Caribbean, there is a new project which is still in the preparatory phase, but the funding is confirmed. And this project will focus mainly on two key areas. One is the impact of COVID-19 on the shipping sector, and the other is looking at making shipping sustainable for the region. So this is a Norway and IMO partnership project. So that's something that's in the pipeline. I expect will be launched in 2022. We of course don't need to talk about the work of the GMN project, that's been covered, but there are other projects like Green Voyage, another IMO project that's working with Belize as a lead pilot country to improve energy efficiency, focusing on port and shipping. The intention there is to share key learnings, disseminate with the wider region. So, yeah, I think to summarize that, there's two parts to it. There's the ITCP side, which is very focused on supporting implementation of regulation. And there's this now growing kind of project-focused work, which is covering things from COVID-19 to energy efficiency, GHG reduction, and I expect that there will be more in the future. So not just looking at energy efficiency issues, but potentially looking at safety issues as well. So I expect that there to be a lot more activity and support for the Caribbean in the future. Yeah, I think that covers it. Thanks, Petra.
Thank you, Anton. Very comprehensive response. Now we have a question that I would like to direct at Captain Badalou. How do you think a regional body like CSA, the Caribbean Shipping Association, can assist industry on this road to decarbonization?
In one line, with great difficulty. But more seriously, thanks for the opportunity. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever some of us are. The Caribbean Shipping Association, thankfully, has been very involved ever since MTCC started. So we do have a bit of a head start, and we understand what is going on in the region. And we have been talking, as a matter of fact, we've put the environment on the agenda. So it's discussed at every semi-annual and every annual meeting, and we encourage all the countries to discuss it. So we're looking at a number of ways. We're fortunate in the region that encouraging cleaner fuels is already happening. And we have to encourage use of renewable energy, look at incentives. Thankfully, when you look at some of the graphs shown earlier, we see that the maritime administrations and the ship owners seem to be ahead of the game in terms of awareness and knowing what's going on, which is going to be a good step. We may want to look at encouraging ports to give priority to boats that are clean, for ships that are clean. And I don't know if we'll get to the Norwegian ideal of having plugins for ship when they come in, so that they can be part of a clean hookup for power supplies, but that is something down the road. So it is on our agenda. We know it's going to be extremely difficult, but it's a discussion that's continuing, and certainly we'll be looking at incentives, and we'll be working very, very closely with MTCC on all of this. Let me just add, wearing a CARIB-MEPA hat for a minute. CARIB-MEPA is going to get very involved in training, and we've already started talking to the Center of Oceanic Studies at UTT to look at training people in MARPOL. And of course, Schedule Annex 6 is going to be very much part of that. So having a cadre of trained people, I think, will also go a long way in fully implementing this down the road when it comes into effect.
Thank you very much. Next question seems to be port focused. So I believe I'll direct this question to Mr. Ashley Taylor. What challenges do you see with respect to decarbonization as a port?
I see the challenges for the ports, I think, from a number of different areas. I think the first and foremost really is the issue of compliance by the shipping lines and compliance by the other stakeholders. Now, if you look at our situation regionally, so the individual ports generally are what you call small players when you compare us in the context of the global environment and the larger ports in Europe, Asia, and USA, and so on. So shipping lines would, on an individual basis, would tend to have a lot more clout and a lot more sway in terms of what they do and what they are able to get away with. Because make no mistake, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, individual ports are in the business first and foremost to be profitable and make money. And if ports are competing against each other, and you have one port that takes the position that they are going to enforce compliance, and the other ports don't do it, then basically the shipping line can decide, you know, especially if it's transshipment, they can decide, you know what, I'm going to take my business elsewhere because there's a less requirement for compliance there. So one of the key issues that will have to face us really is the issue of governments putting in place the necessary legislative agenda or criteria to ensure that there's a high level of compliance. And again, it can't be just one government doing it, but governments have to come together to ensure that all ports in the region are competing on the same level playing field, and that the shipping lines are required to comply right across the board. So that's the issue as far as shipping lines are concerned. The issue with respect to local stakeholders, so for example, trucking companies and so on, it also goes back to one, in respect to the regulatory framework, but it also goes also to really a cost issue. Again, if you look at, I mean, our economies are not as developed. So probably in the industry, you have trucks that are 15, 20, 25 years old and so on. To get a trucking company, for argument's sake, to be able to comply with new emission requirements and so on, is going to require significant investments from these companies and so on going forward. So that's in respect of the stakeholders. In respect of the ports themselves, is also going to be a cost issue. One is the cost of financing to put in place the necessary infrastructure to ensure there's a higher level of dependence on renewable energy. So that there's a financial component and so on aspect to that. Access to the technology itself, training and development components. So it's a number of different things that really have to fall into place to make sure that these things happen. But I think overall it starts at the top, from the individual governments setting in place the necessary regulatory and legislative type of framework.
Thank you. I am directing the port questions to Mr. Taylor, but please feel free, any other panelists, if you want to join in, if you have any additional points. I see Vivian, please go ahead.
Ashley, thank you for that. And I think you're very concise, and the picture that is facing ports in this decarbonization initiative. But if what I want to ask is, are you aware of any of the ports that within the Caribbean, or if Plebdeco is actively pursuing financing under blue economy initiatives or green initiatives? Because I know World Bank and IADB have certain initiatives that are targeting decarbonization and trying to promote sustainability in the blue economy. Are you aware of any of these initiatives across the Caribbean, or is Plebdeco involved in any of these?
We are not involved of any at this point in time. And even before you get into that, we have to make sure that you have the necessary framework and so on in place, right? Which really starts with having the data available to you. And as you're aware, we have started discussions with you guys to partner with you to start the data collection process. I think once that the data is collected, or once you get a critical mass as far as data collection is concerned, then we can start thinking about putting our necessary framework in place. Unless we know where we are, it doesn't make sense going down a road to put a system in place without having necessary data, so you know where you actually need to be.
Completely understand. And with respect to, digitalization is also being seen as a key part of the path towards decarbonization. Where would you see, if you're in a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of digitalization in the port environment and the community system, where would you put Plebdeco?
You put me on the spot. I would say right now, the intent is to be a 10. I would say that right now we would somewhere between a 4 and a 5. And again, it's not for lacking of will, but again, getting to that point is more than just about what you want to do. Is also about getting stakeholders on board, having necessary infrastructure and so on in place to ensure that everyone across the board will be able to tap into that type of infrastructure. So just to give you an example, right? One of our flagship projects that we are currently looking at, which is apart from being increasing our efficiency, is also going to play a key role in terms of reducing the amount of emissions. We are looking at automating our gate systems. So automating our gate system will not only reduce our cost and improve efficiency, but it's also going to significantly reduce the emissions from trucks. Because when trucks come to your port, and the truck spends an hour and a half in a line, the emissions clearly are quite significant. When this system is implemented, a truck comes to our gate, it literally spends seconds as opposed to half an hour or whatever waiting in line to get in. Now, having that system in place is not just about Plebdeco, right? Wanting to do it is also about getting customs on board and getting customs to agree to change some of its systems and so on, getting the other stakeholders like the trucking companies and so on board with the changing procedures and the changing system. So it's not only about us alone, it's really about getting the other players actively involved.
Thank you so much for sharing that insight, and so very happy to hear about that initiative with the truckers.
Thank you. We have one more question focused on ports. So I'll direct it again to Mr. Taylor, please. Do the ports have any plan to prompt ships to uptake green technology when they visit? such as an incentive scheme?
Again, and it goes back to the one of the original questions. Our intention, the quick answer to that is yes. The second part of that answer is not immediately, and again it goes back to, okay, once we start collecting the necessary information, we will then have a better idea as to how we can craft necessary incentive systems and so on to encourage the shipping lines and vessels to be greener.
Thank you. I think we can take a question from audience. Mr. Williams would like to know, will access to certain markets play a factor in the future? Any of the panelists would like to take this on? Will access to certain markets play a factor in the future?
Thank you, Petra. I'll take a go at it if it's okay.
Please.
Okay. So the yes, it will, because how I see this is it's no difference to any other business, and sometimes as more and more we look into it, we have to also see the history of shipping. I mean, especially when it comes to technology or the financial models, a lot of it flows from what is happening on the shore, right? So the access of market, when means, if I understand the question correctly, it will impact. Now we have already cited the issues related to financial investment or the availability of financial finance or the financial mechanisms where markets can take advantage from it. So that will play a critical role, because the investors are looking there. You already are aware of Poseidon principles. The banking sector is coming together, which is heavy on ESG components, right? So it is going to become part of many existing mechanisms, like concessional loan. So what would qualify for a concessional loan? Do you have environmental aspects marked in there? Do you qualify for a lower interest rate if you are hitting these sustainable goals? What would be the indicators to work in? So all that is going to, and any market player offering those solutions will certainly benefit as a first mover. I will also like to combine it with what was previously discussed with by Vivian and Mr. Taylor on the initiatives within the ports or anything. I mean, when they were talking about the finance or blue economy, I mean, during my recent research, I came across where IDB and CDB, Caribbean Development, along with Inter-American Development Bank, they jointly created a sustainable energy facility, which is worth 71 million US loan and grant package. So when we say loan, so basically they created a fund which is called a Sustainable Energy Facility, which is not directly looking at shipping, but which is looking at the to support the energy mix on the shore side, because we know that Caribbean economies are heavily dependent upon fossil fuel for their energy mix. So if I'm talking about providing shore power to ships when they are in port, it makes no sense if the power is still generated from a fossil fuel, right? So it means we have to have that suitable energy mix. So any investment of that nature on the shore side. So if we are developing a solar capacity, which World Bank or any other organization, IDRB or anybody is supporting, we should not forget that the country's investment or benefit stop at the gate of the port. They have to extend right up to the berth, right? So if we have a availability of renewable energy, we have to take into consideration the capacity required by the ports, the capacity required by the maritime traffic it is responding to or it is serving to. So that should be taken into consideration when we are looking at what would be our future energy demands. It means we need to look at the energy demand of the port and the maritime traffic serviced by that port. Then only we can answer this in its entirety. Otherwise, we'll keep fighting one thing on the inside the gates of the ports, and the picture on the outside of the gates will be different, right? So it has to be, that's why I said it has to be part of the bigger action. And this will also be very lucrative to people who want to invest money in such developments, because then it becomes, the risk sharing is reduced, because it is not something we are only doing with the port or only doing with the ships. it is a project which involves the wider economy, wider aspects of the government. So for any private investor, the risk sharing is reduced.
Thank you, Captain. And we have one more question coming in from the audience. Mr. Admeade, thank you. The Commonwealth Secretariat has assisted state in drafting shipping regulations in the past. As countries are experiencing difficulty developing legislation, my question is, does IMO have a system in place that undertake the actual drafting to assist state in meeting their obligation? I'm not sure if Vivian, you could respond to this.
Or I could take this.
Or you could take
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
Anton. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Anton.
Vivian, do you want to go first?
No worries. I can say that the IMO has had consultants within the region trying to build capacity, specific capacity within the region for legislative drafting in terms of with specific emphasis on maritime legislation. And I was one of those missions in 2010 where we trained chief parliamentary councils from across the region. One of the obstacles that we identified in that workshop was that a lot of the legal drafts that come in terms of the model legislation themselves, are not drafted in the spirit and the culture of the drafting traditions of the respective countries. So it has to be very nuanced. There are specific drafting traditions that each country requires before it can be laid in their respective parliaments. So in the past, the IMO has put in place consultants, model legislation, etc. But at the same time, one of the things and one of the tools required is a specific team that is really conversant, and this comes out often in our MTCC workshops as well, where there's a request and a repeated request from maritime administrations where they want a pool of legal drafters that can assist at least the Commonwealth Caribbean in putting in place specific maritime legislation, because it is one of the major impediments to implementing the conventions within the region. Anton?
Brilliant. Yeah, that's covered a few of my points, Vivian. Thank you. My own experience is, well, first of all, the answer is yes. IMO has in the past provided this kind of drafting assistance. I've been involved in a drafting workshop in South Africa a few years ago. But I think, it's important to emphasize that there isn't a system as such for providing this type of support. Rather, this type of activity has been undertaken on an ad hoc basis. And as Vivian said, it's usually based on a direct request from the relevant country to the administration, to the organization, to IMO. And I think this type of activity has to be agreed on a case-by-case basis, because there's a lot of factors to consider. What are the actual requirements of the country? What are the capabilities? How useful would external support be? So it's a very kind of country-focused question, and as such, there isn't an IMO system in place for providing the support. Rather, historically, it's been undertaken on a case-by-case example.
Thank you both. Another question I have, I think I may direct to Captain Singh. How important is the regional approach to strategy planning for decarbonization of maritime transport? So regional approach to strategy planning.
Thank you, Petra. I think this cannot be, further emphasized as we are listening already. I mean, there is certain competitive nature among ports in the region. There is the business of shipping itself is based on that competitive nature. So regional approach is required. Either we see it from either regulatory ask perspective or compliance perspective, or when we are even seeing from the support perspective. I would like to share a a different thought on this. We are aware that yes, a regional approach, we agree. I mean, I would say most of us will agree it is required and is important, but lot of technological options will become appropriate and suitable if we will follow through with a regional approach. Just a simple example, if a ship is plying between two ports, say here in Trinidad and what the next stop is Grenada or in Suriname or somewhere. Now, the ship may be able to take an appropriate technology, but it will not allow the vessel a continuous run of more than 100 nautical miles or 150 nautical miles, and the next port is within 80 nautical miles. Now, regional approach is required if we want to sustain that type of technology. So infrastructure investment to support that vessel would be required in those ports. So if we are targeting, it means it is not that only one port can go ahead and proceed with its green initiatives or sustainable initiatives. Where are the ships going? Where are ships visiting? What kind of supports they would need, right? And this is where I also feel because sometimes these studies become too generic, that we need infrastructure for transition fuel like LNG, or we need to bring in this, but we need to be very specific, especially when it comes to the regional approach. Why? Because we need to see what are we investing in, and do we actually need it, or identify what we need. Okay, we say we develop a LNG facility for transition, but how many ships actually come and fuel here? That would be waste of money in developing such an infrastructure, whether it is a suitable place for such an, what would be a suitable, what is the range of the vessels operating in region. So regional approach is required from compliance aspect, yes, and from facilitating the ships aspect also, because the technologies which are available, which are tested, and the biggest advantage we have as SITS, I mean, I always hear that we are challenged or restricted due to our capacity financially or regulatory, but we have a biggest advantage. We can leapfrog because we know what is happening in the developed world, where they have failed or how things could. So that is the biggest advantage we have, and we should take. And that leapfrogging will not happen in absence of a regional approach again, because we are so small. Doing things on our own will become very big for us. But as a region, we are a considerable force, and we can make things happen.
Thank you,
I just want to add to what Suchit said. As the whole Caribbean develops, interconnectivity going to play a major role among the islands as each one of them develop also. And I see maritime sector being playing a major role in this. And for all reasons, intents and purposes, once we plan ahead and we do it in a cleaner way, a cleaner manner, the transportation of the entire region could benefit and see a reduction in the emissions, not by increasing the maritime transportation and improving the interconnectivity of the islands.
Thank you. I have one specific question regarding to pilot projects. So I would like to direct that to Ms. Suzette Balkaran. What were some of the challenges faced in data collection for MTCC Caribbean pilot projects?
Thanks, Petra. The very nature of the pilot projects itself, it involved, of course, getting data from across different territories. We had to actually, come up with we had to identify, we had to utilize what was the most effective means of getting our data collection form out there. Ideally, yes, we would have loved for it to have been completely online. In the early days, we saw where it is that some ports actually were still utilizing hard copy forms. Then we had to scan stuff, bring it in, and then put it into a usable format for data collection. So there were different challenges. Some even involved where it is that we had to get it in a way across to the seafarers for them to see that it wasn't just another form to be filled out. The voluntary nature of our data gathering, it was already a challenge by itself. So basically we had to engage in so many one-on-one discussions. We had to have a lot of webinars. We also engaged in platforms such as with the CSA, outreaching, bringing awareness to our pilot projects, engaging in some non-disclosure agreements with some ports. So there were several challenges, but of course we always found some way to make sure that our data collection could continue.
Thank you, Suzette. We are slowly running out of time, I'm afraid. I see Mr. Badalu has a raised hand, so I'll give you the floor. And thank you for MTCC colleagues are trying to answer some of the audience questions in writing. So thank you for that. Mr. Badalu, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to make a couple remarks about what Stefan raised there. The question of a regional line and a line serving the region is something that has been discussed at many forums. It's an idea, it's worth talking about, but there should be some things that people must bear in mind. One is they must not depend on the governments to finance it or support it, because then it will get nowhere fast. And secondly, they should try to lean or join with either a consortium or a big major line, a foreign line that comes in here, because that's where a lot of the the feeder work would come from. And certainly if you do that with a big line who is very conscious about environment and things like that, who's already probably doing it in Europe, it will be able to transfer some of that technology to our people down here to have that sort of joint venture working in the region.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm afraid we will have to conclude our webinar. So I would like to extend a huge thank you to the speakers and panelists for their great contribution. And also I'd like to thank you, the audience, for your participation and for the questions that were submitted. We will try, if we haven't managed to answer all of them, we will try to do so in writing. So I hope that all of you found this webinar to be informative and enriching, and we will look forward to welcoming you next time. If you would like to find out more, then of course you can visit our website at gmn.imo.org. So thank you very much again, and I wish you a very nice day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Take care.
Bye.